Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Healy from Leo Burnett, Chicago. I'm here on behalf of the Publicist Group to welcome you to our session at the 3%. This year's theme of the radically inclusive future of work is exactly what we're all crafting within our companies and agencies. For years, I've been saying that who we are is intrinsic to what we make, and never has the who been more important or a more powerful tool. Which is why I'm proud to introduce this session, The Future of Work is Culture. I hope you enjoy. Have a great time. Bye.
My name is Shani Sandy, and welcome to my session, The Future of Work is Culture. And while the statement is quite simple, there's much more to it. So let's scratch the surface. I propose that the future of work is the rejection of today's culture. This may sound harsh or even a bit radical, but when the culture upheld by our industry and our institutions and even ourselves at times, excludes people for reasons outside of their talents, it's time for that level of boldness. When you age out because your industry is a young person's game, when that young person is working under exploitative conditions, when your own culture is exploited for the latest campaign trends and capital gain, when all of these forms of rejection are happening, it's time to flip the equation. It's time for us to reject that culture. I came to this conclusion after a number of experiences, namely three aspects come to mind. The first, my career. The second, my peers, Black designers. And the third, the very times that we live in. These themes are connected by being other than the normalized culture, specifically being Black in America. And if you're not Black, know that what follows still affects you. Let's start with the times we're living in. I'd ask that we listen, because if we listen very carefully, we know and feel beyond all those sound bites that we live in times where the condition of our humanity is deeply troubled. It's as if this great pause of COVID-19 spawned the beginning of a great purge. COVID-19, in a way, it captured our attention span and it gave us a chance to see things clearly. And there before our eyes, in our yearning for good news and for safety, we all saw the very opposite. We all saw another virus. This is the virus that killed George Floyd and many other Black people before and now. And perhaps this could now be the purge. Amidst a pandemic, masks are on, masks are off, unemployment is rising, people are protesting, statues are even toppling, and elections are coming. And everything appears to be drastically changing. It's visible, it's vocal, and it's defying what was normal. Though, as a Black person in America, times were never normal or new. I can't breathe speaks to every dimension of Black life in America. There is a knee on the neck of all aspects of Black life, including creativity. Whether the knee on our neck be the lack of credit, the theft of work, or forbidden voices or limited opportunities, we've been stifled. But it's because of these times that we live in and the possibility of a purging of past norms, that there's now a bit more of an opening to be seen, to be heard, and maybe even to matter. That can allow for some type of healing, and it can even allow for a rebirth. But to do so, we must reject the culture that's against the possibilities. So I'd ask for us to listen again and to listen carefully and awaken to the voices of Black designers. Specifically, I share the work that I've done through a research study where I interviewed 18 Black designers and 5 white designers with a desire to tap into a distinct perspective on creativity, mainly for those Black designers as they fall outside of the cultural norm of design, specifically of the communication design field. I looked at this across 4 different aspects: person, process, place, and product. But what was overwhelming in terms of importance for those Black designers was the role of place in being able to create optimal creativity. Black designers clearly stated that they needed a culture of safety, inclusivity, and creative freedom. And as I evaluated this further, their idea of an optimal creative place really had much more to do with the energies and the behavioral norms and the beliefs of a space as opposed to the actual elements in it. In essence, it was about the culture. Interestingly, Black designers also discussed having a place that was ego-free and conducive to conversation and exchange. Only Black designers mention this dynamic of the interdependence of the creative making, the process itself, and the creative place, the culture. These voices were very clear. To give fully of their creative selves, the culture of work must be scrutinized and even rejected. The voices of Black designers have told us
ideas cannot grow in an environment that a creative person doesn't feel safe. It's a very scary thing to go down a road that you've never traveled before or take an avenue that you've never done before if you don't feel safe and supported. You can't be innovative, you can't be creative if the place that you're in is not. Designer Malcolm. Sometimes as African Americans, we can get in the door and actually get the job. But the culture is so toxic, you can't. You have to quit, you have to leave. And so if you can't thrive in an environment where you feel like you're growing, you feel like the people embrace you, you feel like you can ask questions, you can learn, or feel like you're appreciated, it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult to grow, and it causes mental instability, it causes mental issues, and people don't think about that when you're working at a company. In a culture where people are always attacking you, or they're being passive aggressive, or they're doing these little microaggressions, they're trying to be funny, it's very frustrating. And to still perform at a high level in a situation like that is to be applauded. But eventually you have to leave because you can't take it. Designer Andre. Optimal is for there not to be any hindrance. I struggle with that. I struggle with that so much. Looking for an environment that will trust you. Designer Janice.
rejecting culture is easier said than done. And many of us, for many different reasons, have ventured down many paths. Some of us have decided to work within cultures and try to push those cultures forward, even though at times it can be weary and we question the worthiness of it all. Others have adapted though realize that they have compromised the fullness of themselves. And yet others of us have created our own paths with its own pains and payoffs. And this is where I'd like to share my own career story, at least the abridged version of that story. My official entry into the creative industry was significant. It was my freshman year at Columbia University, and a classmate of mine told me about a program called Inroads. And this program was special because it attracted underrepresented students into corporations with the promise of having a paid internship that led to full-time work upon graduation. And so I thought immediately, paid internship, job after I graduate, of course, let's do this. However, the program did not have any opportunities for those interested in creative careers. And so, being from Brooklyn and not taking no for an answer, I pressed my Inroads counselor, and together we found a role. I landed the very first Inroads creative internship, which I did for 2 summers, and partnered, at that time at least, I thought I was partnering with a group, both women, a female art director and copywriter. It was at Young and Rubicam in New York City. And unbeknownst to me, creating an inroad there would be a theme of my career. It was 2001, and I had decided that I actually didn't want to pursue advertising as a career. I was going to look for work in a design studio. But having that luxury of even looking for work in a design studio in New York City quickly faded away because it was the midst of the aftermath of 9/11. I couldn't find any roles in my industry despite having done internships and worked throughout college at design firms, having an online and offline portfolio, and having 2 degrees in art-related practices. I asked friends of friends, I applied to countless jobs, and dragged my portfolio throughout New York City, going on endless interviews. But still, I couldn't find any work. And I realized at that point, I had to make a decision, and I started to take my side projects and made them into my main projects and developed my own studio. I was working for startups and small businesses and even did some freelance gigs at the time. And I learned how to price work and scope it, negotiate, and even protect my work. I loved being able to send invoices and also depositing checks. All the while, I continued looking for work. And it was almost 3 years later when I landed a job as a designer at a fintech company. I was the first and the only designer at a company called Capital IQ in the financial district of New York City. And I had the chance to touch everything in classic startup fashion: website design, advertising, branding, marketing. And the long hours I had spent in my studio really paid off because, also in classic startup fashion, we worked very long hours. It was also a culture very much unlike anything I had encountered before. The majority of my counterparts were in their 20s and 30s, investment bankers, very focused on finance. And here I was, this 20-something-year-old Black female designer who was now part of the team. For the most part, as the first and only designer, I was given autonomy, which I absolutely took advantage of. And my primary focus was creating high quality design work. But things changed. After about 2 years at Capital IQ, the business was acquired by Standard & Poor's. And my responsibilities and role had the opportunity to expand. And while we retained a culture that was scrappy, as it was called, our reach started to change, our visibility and our capabilities started to expand. And I knew it was time for my role to also change. I could no longer be the only. I needed more hands on deck. No longer did I just concern myself with high quality design, but I realized that I also could play a strategic role in the way that our experiences were perceived and also actually experienced, right? Even if it wasn't a design driven business. And this for me became an opening. I had a chance to return the favor and bring on paid interns, which I then evolved into a team of full time designers, which meant that I evolved into a creative director. The journey would unfold even further. And after building several in house teams of multi-dimensional diversity and hiring amazing creative talent and partnering with agencies, it was clear that my evolution was actually coinciding with the business's evolution. It was time for the business to restructure and rebrand. And from my perspective, I thought that design could help envision that transformation. And so I took it upon myself to pitch a creative organization that would carry out this new unifying brand expression across mediums and businesses and continents. And with that, I became the first executive creative director at S&P Global and led the creative capability for a new brand and an in-house team. And my journey is far from over. Today, I am the first again, the first design executive in a traditionally engineering driven organization with a charge to lead, guess what? A design transformation that is fundamentally a cultural one. And I find again that my role of crafting culture precedes that of crafting craft. And that the designers who have pioneered a new culture before I arrived had the tough and sometimes awkward position of having to reject the norm, of being that voice of difference in order to create a future that would change the way that we work. And while there's still plenty to do, our current transformation would have never been possible without embracing a culture of human centered design, quite different from what existed before. In these career experiences, culturally, I was not the norm. I was typically the only designer or the newbie or the youngest, or often the only woman, and almost always the only Black person. And at times, all of those all at once. However, choosing to embrace all of these aspects, I realized I either had to make my own outside of that system or find a way to make my own within it. Often, culture needs that agent or catalyst to move forward, and sometimes a culture just isn't ready. And that's also helpful information. It means don't waste your time, but you won't know until you try, and that means being bold. So, what does bold look like? Well, I think it's a matter of us taking one of the things we do really well as creatives, critique, and critiquing the cultures that we're in, within companies, within our institutions, and even venturing to co opt it. I say we reject the cool for the psychologically safe, and that we reject award winning obsession for creative freedom. We reject the diverse label for inclusive reality, and that we reject the created by for the created with. And we reject the comfortable for the flexible. And perhaps in that way, we can create a future of work that represents all of us and that is truly creative. Thank you.